Good morning and welcome to another exciting day here at the U.S. Center. I am Tom Giliberto. I'm a meteorologist at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and I am the master of ceremony here for this morning's event. The U.S. Center, where you are currently at, is a public outreach and diplomacy space organized by the Department of State. We have a full schedule touching on a ton of different things, from climate science to climate resilience to climate action, involving governments, academics, communities, and businesses. So we do have a full schedule today. So make sure to pick up a brochure in the back so you get our full schedule to know what's going on. And for those listening online, you can get our full schedule there too at state.gov/US Center. I do want to note also for folks, if you have any questions, make sure to jot them down. There could be some time at the very end for some questions. And for those folks, again, watching online, you can get your questions answered too using the hashtag AskUSCenter. I will introduce the host of today's events, which is Companies and Communities Cooperating for Ambitious Climate Action. It's basically about how different players are working together to make an impact on climate change. Our host is Lance Pierce. Lance is the president of CDP North America and has responsibility for strategy and delivery across a range of CDP programs in the United States and Canada. Lance?
Sorry, is this on? Yes, great. Thank you very much. So, hello, welcome to the U.S. Center here at COP-21, and welcome to those of you watching the live stream around the world to our event focusing on companies and communities cooperating for ambitious climate action. So my name is Lance Pierce, and I am the president of CDP North America. CDP is a global not-for-profit organization hosting the largest disclosure platform in the world for investors and companies using corporate and city data to improve their performance on a number of natural capital and environmental issues, including greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And so through the reporting and disclosure platform of CDP, companies, investors, cities, policymakers, and others come together to focus on data-driven solutions to the issues of climate change, clean energy, water, and forests. And we are pleased to bring you what I think is going to be a lively and engaging conversation about the ways in which all of the players who have to be part of the climate change solution can come together and work both on their piece of the puzzle, but also in concert to have a much bigger impact. So if you've been coming to the COP over the past few years, you've probably noticed a bit of a trend. What used to be largely a sovereign government affair, attended really mostly by policymakers, by ministers. The number of presidents every year varied depending upon what was being negotiated, and a cluster really of largely environmentally focused NGOs. This event has been evolving into a much bigger tent of actors. As climate change, disruptive climate change, becomes more visible and affects more people and more places now, a large spectrum of a whole range of NGOs representing a variety of different issues that weren't in this dialogue a couple of years ago are now here, are now visible. They're bringing their constituencies' interests to these talks. And as national governments have delayed taking action, the UNFCCC process has been evolving to accommodate where the places where the action is actually happening, and that's at the local level, at the state level, with companies and investors. And so we're witnessing the rise of the non-state actor in UN parlance as a contributor to the global climate negotiations. So what are non-state actors? They're the governments of subnational cities, states, and regions putting out their own policies and their own programs to mitigate and build resilience to a changing climate. They're small and large companies who have in recent years identified a very strong business case for action and who've gotten into the act of advocating for climate policy, committing to transparency and continuous improvement in their GHG emissions performance. And like the more than 260 companies represented here who've joined the Commit to Action campaign led by CDP and our We Mean Business partners. They're also investors who are finding, contrary to the prevailing bias, that there is not a supply of and a demand for climate-friendly products and services, which in fact there is, and a growing supply and demand as well. And they're finding a need to manage the risk in their portfolios of system-wide disruption that climate change events can cause. So for all the right reasons, non-state actors have become a force, not only in the process of influencing outcomes on a treaty that governments might negotiate, but also as a body of stakeholders who are working to shape positive interventions and outcomes on climate in ways that might benefit consumers, employees, shareholders, beneficiaries, and citizens in communities around the world. These actors are all influential when they work alone, and they're also in concert together can achieve much greater results. And because no one company, city, or country can tackle climate change, they're getting organized, working together, and making it happen. So today, we have a great panel lineup for you to talk about. They'll tell you how they're working singly and together to up the ambition on what's possible in taking action, making their businesses more resilient, improving the lives of citizens, and companies and investors and the governments here in our event today are profiled in this report, which was prepared by CDP and the Climate Group for Climate Week New York earlier this year. It's on unlocking ambition, top corporate and subnational climate commitments. There will be an update of this report coming out before the end of the year and downloadable for those of you who are interested. So now, nearly all of our examples today are coming from California, which in the United States holds some of the best examples of policy innovation at the city and state level, as well as in corporate commitment and innovation. California's got a history of policy innovation, a history of policy action on climate change actually going back to the 1980s, and has a climate change strategy calling for GHG reductions of 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, and an increase in renewable energy powering the state to 50%. Non-state actors in California are conducting their own international relations on climate change in many ways, with California having MOUs and agreements with about 10 different countries and the states within them around the world, including the Under 2 MOU, on which it was one of the founders, and which to date has had some 57 jurisdictions from 19 countries and commitments that have signed or endorsed representing about 570 million citizens. If the Under 2 MOU today were a country, it would have a GDP of about 17 trillion US dollars. So our first speaker is going to help set the stage for some of this at the state level. And I'll introduce each of our speakers in turn and ask them to give a few introductory remarks about the work that they and their organizations are leading. And then from that, we'll have a group conversation and some time for Q&A as well. So our first speaker on the panel this morning is Ken Alex. Ken is the director of the Governor's Office for Planning and Research and is a senior advisor to Governor Jerry Brown. He's the chair of the Strategic Growth Council in California, and Ken has led a broad effort to modernize land use planning, easier access and local application, streamline permits, reduced barriers to development, especially emphasizing climate-friendly development, promotion of transit-oriented development, protection of agricultural land and open space, and many, many other factors contributing to sustainable development. Before joining the governor's office, Ken was Assistant Attorney General heading the Environment Section of the California Attorney General's Office and co-head of that office's Global Warming Unit. And from 2000 to 2006, he led the California Attorney General's Energy Task Force investigating price and supply issues related to California's energy crisis. So a range of perspectives on this, and I'd like to turn it over to Ken Alex for our opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much. I want to first thank the U.S. and the U.S. Pavilion for having California. It's a bit of a challenge to do California's story in 5 minutes, but we'll give it a try. It's very appropriate to be on stage with this group of businesses, the City of Oakland, civil society. All of us are working together, and it's actually the only way we can achieve the goals that we seek to achieve. So California is, as we like to remind everybody, if we were a nation, we would be the 8th largest economy in the world. That means of the 195 or so countries that are here negotiating this week and next, California is larger than 186 of them. We do not, however, have a seat at the table, and therefore we are trying to figure out how best to present California's interest and to figure out ways to influence the process and generate more ambition among the actors in the international process. So California has about 1.3% of global emissions, not insignificant, but alone cannot take on the emission problem around the world. So We are collaborating with all of these folks, and I'll talk a little bit about how, but I want to set out California's ambitious set of goals, which is economy-wide, which has effectively begun significant reductions already, and at the same time, we continue to grow our economy in California at a faster rate than the average in the United States. So we have a 40% reduction from 1990 levels by 2030. That's our goal in California, and then 80% by 2050. There are 5 pieces of that effort. The first is we are in California above 25% renewables in our system. We'll be at 33% no later than 2020 and very likely sometime next year. And we now have a 2030 goal of 50% renewables. We're on our way to doing that. All of these we could spend quite a lot of time on, but I'm just going to run through them. And you'll see in each of them, they require public and private partnerships. They require partnerships with cities and regions and other states. So the second is to double energy efficiency in buildings by 2050. That is a pretty big challenge. We know that buildings are a very significant source of emissions. The third is to reduce by up to 50% of oil in the transportation sector. In California, transportation is the largest source of emissions, as much as 40%. This is a significant challenge because, of course, the oil and gas industry, for them, it's an existential challenge as we reduce at that scale. Fourth, we are, again, California is leading in reduction of short-lived climate pollutants, a very important topic around particularly methane, HFCs, and black carbon. And then finally, natural and working lands, in which we can talk quite a lot about sustainable land practice and agriculture, forest fires, and the like. So that's the overall program in California. For each piece, we have very specific plans, and we're working concertedly on an overall scoping plan. But I wanted to also put this in the context of subnational action, given that's the topic we're talking about today. And the Under 2 MOU is already mentioned. In thinking about here in Paris how to be effective as California without a seat at the table, as I noted, we thought, in conjunction with Baden-Württemberg in Germany, that we would put together an agreement for subnational governments that would indicate that subnational governments around the world, including cities and regions, provinces and states, and those nations that support this activity, that we would put together a coalition of those entities that think that more ambition is needed in the process here in Paris, and that we would do it in a substantive way. So the Under 2 MOU, for each signatory, they agree either to reduce by 80 to 95% from 1990 levels by 2050, or to get to below 2 tons per capita in that same time frame. And that's a unique dual provision that allows both developing regions and developed regions to participate. So over 20 of our signatories are from tropical rainforest states. We also have the 4 largest industrial areas in Europe. So as of today, we're up to 65 jurisdictions. By the end of this Paris COP, we anticipate that we will have over 100 jurisdictions that will have signed, and we will exceed 23% of world GDP represented by those entities. So this is a very serious effort. In addition, we are connecting with We Mean Business and parallel endorsing each other's efforts because they have a similar program to have very ambitious reduction goals. But I don't want to keep talking, so I think I'll turn it back over to you at this point.
No, great. Thank you, Ken. Very helpful context. So clearly, California at the state level has been engaged, has been inactive. It and other states are visible here. And if you go down to the next level of government, cities are also hard at work. And you may have noticed, again, for those of you who've been coming to the COP for a while, there's just an extraordinary number of cities who have gotten engaged in this process over the past few years. And we are very fortunate to have with us today Libby Schaaf, who is the current mayor of Oakland, California. Especially fortunate to have her here today because there are so many mayoral events going on. Mayors are in high demand here, so we greatly appreciate her taking her time to be with us here on the panel. She's the current mayor of Oakland, California. Elected in November 2014, she co-founded the not-for-profit Oakland Cares, which organized and implemented hundreds of volunteer community improvement projects across the city. She was a top aide to former mayor and current governor of California, Jerry Brown. And the city of Oakland is also notable for its energy and climate action plan, where it's planning to reduce GHG emissions 36% by 2020, along with a whole host of package of reductions and incentives around that. So, Libby Schaaf.
Great, thank you. It's exciting to be here representing the power of cities. Now, you should all know why cities are such an important part of the climate change conversation. Cities are producing 70% of the energy-related carbon emissions in the planet. And so we clearly play an important role if we're going to actually make tangible changes. In the business community, there is a myth that businesses can't afford to take climate change actions. But as the CEO of a large organization, because in Oakland we have a strong mayor form of government, so I'm not just the chief elected officer, I'm also the chief executive officer, I can tell you that we can't afford not to take climate change action. Certainly as a coastal city, Oakland is on the San Francisco Bay. We're part of the mighty Bay Area, which I think, California is a large economy in and of itself. The Bay Area, I think, has an economy about the size of Sweden's. We on the coast also have got to pay close attention to this issue. And it can save you money. We in Oakland switched out all of our street lights, more than 30,000 street lights, to LED. But we were able to finance that simply off of the savings from our energy bill. Again, climate action can save you money. We switched our diesel fleets to using renewable diesel fuel at zero additional cost to us. And yet this fuel is producing 70% fewer emissions. For a city like Oakland, climate change, green tech, clean tech is also a huge economic driver for us. We have more than 350 companies in the green and clean tech sectors that employ more than 7,000 workers in our city. So it is clearly an economic engine for us. And as far as partnerships go, we are very focused in Oakland on marrying our climate change goals with our social justice and equity goals. And that's where partnerships have truly been powerful for us. We have entered into several partnerships, including with the California Youth Employment Partnership, as well as a great organization called Rising Sun, to do job training. And to do job training in low-income communities of color so that we can actually educate people in communities that don't always find out about energy efficiency improvements. And these can be the citizens that go out in the communities that they grew up in and help homeowners, apartment dwellers, reap the benefits of energy efficiency, which not only can help save them money on their monthly energy bills, but also help save the planet as well as provide great jobs for a growing sector. And finally, Rising Sun specifically works on our community members who are returning from prison to give them a great skill and a great entry back into our society. So those are just some of the examples of how we partner with businesses, how we partner with nonprofits. We're doing a lot of collaboration with our other governments. The PACE program in California is a really important tool. It allows homeowners, property owners to finance energy efficiency improvements on their property tax bills. And that's a beautiful thing, because when you sell the property, that payment gets passed on to the next owner. But that is something that we have had to collaborate with our state government on, something that other states really should be paying attention to. So these collaborations are really helping us meet our goal, our ambitious goals. I'm proud to say that Oakland, just in the last 10 years, has reduced our core emissions by 10%, and more importantly, our consumption emissions by 15%. And we also think it's important that both governments and companies not just measure the emissions that come from that actual location, but also think about the emissions that are caused from any part of the planet when you are consuming goods within your boundaries. So those are some of the things that Oakland, California is doing. I'm excited to hear more about the conversation we're going to have coming up.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Schaaf. So working away again down the tiers to non-state actors who are taking action on climate change, absent the national governments working fast enough. Companies are another big non-state actor who've gotten into the game on climate change, and they're doing so because it's an area where their clear economic interest lines up with the public interest represented by their employees, their consumers, the communities where they source and operate, and supporting a healthy environment all around them. Kellogg's, a major American corporation, is not headquartered in California, but has both sourcing and operations there, and is another company working collaboratively on climate action. Kellogg discloses its environmental performance through CDP and is a signer to the American Business Act on Climate Pledge, declaring the company's support for a strong climate change agreement in Paris. It's made also a number of commitments through the We Mean Business campaign, including science-based targets, responsible corporate policy engagement, deforestation-free supply chains, and the Low Carbon Technology Partnership Initiative. Diane Halldor is the Chief Sustainability Officer and the Vice President of Environment, Health, and Safety at Kellogg's. And in addition to a long and distinguished career in environmental consulting prior to joining the company and before her becoming the leader of the company's initiatives in this area, she was the recipient of an award that all of us could only barely dream to aspire to. She was named Superwoman of the Year in 2015 by International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. So watch out. And here is Diane Halldor.
Thank you so much, Lance. It's really a pleasure to be here today on the U.S. Pavilion, being able to talk to you about the incredible importance of public-private partnership and how much more we can accomplish together when we're striving to the types of climate action that we know we all need to take at this point. I'm happy to share a little bit more with you about the Kellogg Company. We are a global food company. We really understand that people care about their food. They want to know where it comes from, how it's grown, how it's made, that there's enough for all. And these are all issues that are really critically important to the Kellogg Company as well. Climate change is an issue of absolute importance for our business. We know that we will continue to face challenges in our continuity of supply for our ingredients. We source ingredients from all over the world, including California, and we make our food all over the world, including in California. And I'll share some of those specific examples of what we're doing when we get into more of the discussion. But what this means for us is that we have to take very meaningful action. We know that it is the right thing to do, but we also know that it has compelling business opportunities and really contributes tremendously to the communities from which we source and in which we operate. We first established sustainability commitments publicly back in 2008. We focused, as many do in business, first on our own footprint, what we could control within our own walls. We focused on reducing energy use, reducing water use, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, of course, reducing waste to landfill. We've exceeded several of those targets. Just in our energy work alone, we've accomplished an absolute reduction since then globally of 12%. And everybody tracks these things different way, but we find that 12 absolute is the best way to do that. And it was kind of cool because our chief financial officer shared the savings accomplished through that absolute reduction at an investor day that we held just last month. As you said, this really contributes money as well. Kellogg Company has achieved more than a $20 million savings in those reductions just since 2008. But those original commitments expire this year, and we've been already working towards what these next generation of commitments mean for us as a global food company. In August of last year, we established our kind of next generation of sustainability commitments, which of course expand our commitments to our own work and our own operations, adding recognition of the importance of bringing alternative energy in while still reducing our energy use, reusing water while reducing our water use, for examples. But because, again, as a food company, the majority of our business relies on what farmers do day in and day out around the world, and our ability to responsibly source what they then produce, we set very specific targets as well for responsible sourcing. We wanted to focus on key ingredients wherever we source them around the world. We wanted to focus on climate-smart agriculture and how we help bring capability building into the communities, large and small, to be more climate-smart in their agricultural practices. And we wanted to also have a focus on smallholder and women, those who are particularly vulnerable in our global supply chains. So we'll be sharing some more examples of those as we go out throughout the day, but we're going to continue to expand on these commitments. At the UN Climate Summit, we established that a quantification of that climate-smart agriculture responsible sourcing commitment means that we intend to support livelihoods for more than 500,000 farmers, in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable Development Goal number 2 focuses fully on hunger, food security, and climate-smart agriculture, of course, intrinsically linked with climate. So these are all issues that we continue to focus on, and even this week yet we'll be announcing some additional commitments. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you for having us.
Great, thank you for that, Diane. And I think if we had a movie, Superwoman versus Climate Change, I think that's a film that the outcome would be so good we wouldn't need a sequel. So now we're going to turn to Google, which is a California headquartered company and has been doing a lot on climate change around the world, taking its own actions and collaborating in a number of areas. It's got a long list of goals and achievements in this area, but there are a couple that actually bear mention here. It's been a carbon neutral company since 2007. It is the largest non-utility purchaser of renewable energy in the world, recently making the pledge at the White House to triple their purchasing of renewables in the next decade, including announcing a series of agreements just yesterday to purchase an additional 842 megawatts of clean energy from sources around the world. Gary DeMuth is the Director of Operations, Data Center, Energy, and Location Strategy for Google, and he works at the intersection of the company's emissions reduction strategy through its facilities, as well as partnering with the communities and governments who are also working on that same problem. And Gary's role is to develop overall direction for Google's global data center site strategy, including managing a team of specialists in both company-built and traditional co-location data center site selection and negotiations. He participated in the founding of Google Energy LLC and was the lead negotiator for Google's 2 initial landmark power purchase agreements to secure over 220 megawatts of wind generation from wind farms in the American Midwest. Gary DeMuth.
Thanks very much, Lance. And thanks very much. We very much appreciate being part of this panel today. And obviously, my esteemed colleagues here, we're all very passionate about this issue of climate change. And Google's initiatives fighting the issue of climate change, it's very fundamental to the culture of the company. It goes back many years at this point. In 2007, we declared that we would be a carbon neutral company. And as Lance said, we started in 2010 with really the first of some very large renewable energy contracts. And just this past week, we've been very proud, as Lance had indicated, that we've actually reached the 2 gigawatt number. We've actually contracted for 2 gigawatts of renewable energy globally for operations. And frankly, we think that we're just getting started. As a lot of IT capacity moves to the cloud, there'll be an increasing need for companies like Google to participate in this space. And so our participation in large renewable energy projects goes back even a number of years. But really, this is a multi-pronged problem at Google. We've really got to attack it from many different angles. Another area where we've really focused is actually in direct investment in renewable energy projects. We've invested about $2.5 billion over the past few years in renewable energy projects, and we've brought on about 3.7 gigawatts of new renewable energy onto the grid globally. We operate a global network of data centers, but those data centers are really the most efficient data centers in the world. We design them from the ground up. We use reuse water when we can. Obviously, we use renewable energy. And we really design these things to be as absolutely energy efficient as possible. Just over the past 5 years, we've actually increased the computing capacity of our data centers about 3.5 times. At the same time, you see a relatively modest increase in the amount of energy that we use. So that's really testament to the real focus and emphasis on efficiency at Google. But that's also just part of the story. We're also working on a number of emerging technologies. You may have heard of Makani, which is a wind kite, which is a new technology to actually generate new wind generation. We've got another project to actually evaluate the solar productivity of rooftops, basically leveraging the work that we've done in computing and Google Earth to actually help people actually figure out whether their home is a good choice for solar productivity. And so really we attack this problem in many different ways. But again, we've really only just started. We're really looking forward to what the future holds and doing a lot more in this space. So we're really looking forward to this panel and looking forward to a great discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Gary. So the last piece of the collaborative puzzle comes together with the investors who provide seed capital to fund projects and get them to scale, and the citizens groups who push their governments and push corporations to do the right thing when it comes to the public good and taking action on climate change. So our next speaker wears both of those hats. Tom Steyer is co-founder of Farallon Capital, a successful hedge fund which he jointly led for over 25 years. And he is also co-founder of 2 community development banks, including Beneficial State Bank, based in Oakland, California. He stepped down from this role in 2012 to become a full-time advocate for action on climate change. He co-founded Nextgen Climate, which is a group focusing on research and policy to support both climate action and economic policy to support sustainable growth and prosperity for families and children. Nextgen is one of several organizations and programs that Tom has founded over the past few years, and you have perhaps also seen him in the media in advance of COP-21 promoting California as an example of how climate regulation and company innovation together can actually work to produce a robust and sustainable economy. Tom Steyer.
So thank you guys very much for coming. It is always a pleasure for people to hear Californians patting themselves on the back about how great we are. And let me say, that I'm looking out at the audience and I see some people from California who have worked on this topic and are friends of mine for 20 years. So it's not just the people up here, it's a bunch of people who are sitting in the audience who've worked on this for a really long time. But as an American, I can say that over the last 7 years, climate has been the most partisan issue in the United States Congress statistically more than any other issue. And as a result, the Congress has been completely frozen. In order for us to succeed, we obviously need a different model from that. And I think what California has is a completely different ecosystem, which starts with a different coalition working on it, which leads to a different policy framework and has led to a completely different economic outcome. So when you look at the people on this panel, they represent different parts of that ecosystem between policy, local actors, and then businesses who are carrying it out on the economic side. So one of the things that is really true about California is we think that we succeed economically in part because we're leading in terms of this energy transformation. And the way that we describe that is different from the way that it's talked about in the rest of the United States. Because we look at this as a deeply human and local issue, so that it involves how we live, how we take care of our families, and the kind of world we want to lead. So those are all big generalizations. So what does that specifically mean about how we talk about this in public and how people who are citizens but don't spend their time thinking about politics and specifically don't spend their time thinking about energy relate to this? And the answer is very simple. They relate to it through job prospects, their costs, and their health. And that is how, on a broad scale, we've built a completely different coalition around energy than the one that exists in most of the United States. So that when you look at the people in California and the groups in California who support the progressive energy policies that we've been talking about, they include progressive businesses like the people who are here, but the bulk of businesses actually are behind this. Labor unions, community groups across the spectrum, as well as environmentalists. So with that kind of deep coalition that goes throughout society, we've been able to build something that can stand up to the organized and virtually infinitely funded power of fossil fuel companies. Because that power exists in California the way that it exists in the rest of the United States. And as a result, when you look at our policies that Ken was describing, you can see a suite of policies that have gone back. I mean, we really trace it back, and the author of this is sitting right here, kind of to 2006 Assembly Bill 32. But it's really much more than that. It really goes back to the 1970s that California's really cared about this and dealt from a policy standpoint completely differently. And it goes up, it started in the 70s, but as Ken said, we passed something this year about moving to 50% renewables by 2030 and doubling our energy efficiency in buildings by 2030. The important thing to remember is that over the past few years, as all of these progressive energy policies have been enacted, California has outpaced the rest of the United States in terms of job growth. So that today, when I was reading the International New York Times with my California hat squarely on my head, the front page said that the only major economy in the world that has managed to grow at the same time that it has reduced GHG emissions was Germany. So for all the Californians sitting on the stage, I think the United States has done that, but more than that, California has done that, has grown very well and reduced our emissions very substantially. So the argument that we can't address climate change while still growing our economy, in the United States, the go-to move for people who don't want this conference to succeed, the go-to move is to label anything that we're in favor of in terms of progressive energy policies as a job-killing energy tax. And the fact of the matter is, all of the experience of the state that has the most progressive energy policies, but also the academic research that's been coming out this year, some of which has come out in the last month, shows that moving to more progressive energy policies and actually implementing a cleaner energy economy leads to net job growth, to higher incomes, and to lower energy costs. So what we've embraced in California has led us to have we're expected to have 500,000 clean tech jobs at the end of this year. But, so from our point of view, the go-to argument of the other side has no validity, and it's really important to make that point because the opposite is made, including in the front page of the International New York Times today. But I think one of the key points is Libby's, which is to make this move is going to create jobs. Solar is 8 times more job intensive than fossil fuel energy generation. We're going to create these jobs. From our standpoint, the question is, are they going to be good paying jobs that people can support a family on, and are they going to be well distributed throughout society? So it's not as if we don't have absolutely huge challenges in the way we implement this, but I think that the basic point here is about message and coalition that makes policy possible and then drives the economic change that we have to have, but also the economic growth and the job creation that we want to have. That's my basic that is the ecosystem in California that has enabled a completely different outcome, a completely different policy, and a completely different group of people rooting for it.
Great, thank you for that, Tom. So we're going to open it up for questions a little bit. I hope we have some time as well for some questions from the audience. So, we've been hearing a lot of themes revolving around partnership, the benefits of partnership, local empowerment, and leading to emissions reductions. So, Tom, maybe I'll start with you. You've, as I said, you've recently founded Nextgen. Why found an NGO at this stage? The NGOs seems like haven't been making enough progress. At least they feel like they haven't been. The governments haven't been moving fast enough. So what's the thinking behind that?
So the mission behind Nextgen Climate, our mission statement is to prevent climate disaster while promoting prosperity for all Americans. And we are committed to acting politically. So the question is, why would that be necessary? And the answer is, in the political system in the United States, we didn't feel as if there was nearly enough counterweight to fossil fuel interests acting politically. So there were incredible policy organizations, there were incredible scientific organizations, there was massive, great work being done, including by some people who I'm looking at this moment. What we didn't feel was true is no one had an economic interest to push the political system the way that fossil fuel companies were pushing the political system. And as a result, the dispersed interests of Californians and of Americans was being overlooked. It's a classic example. I mean, if you think about politics as being organization, that it's organizing interests to be at the table, the old saying is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so from our point of view, it was really important that the political interests of dispersed Americans be represented, because we were having a political failure, that basically organized interests were winning out over the much greater interests but not organized interests of people. So that was the function that we thought was missing, and we felt as if someone has got to be stupid enough to do that job. And so we looked around for the dumbest people we could find, and we looked in the mirror, and lo and behold, there they were.
Great founding story there. We're going to memorialize that here on the web. So great. So you've got an organization founded to sort of fill the political gap, come in. So turning to our companies now, we've got Kellogg and Google. You get approached by NGOs all the time. You get attacked by some groups. You get engaged by some groups. Talk about some of the things that you're seeing in the partnership vein, and again, some of the benefits this is leading to, because this is not happening in a vacuum here.
This comes back for us to the incredible role of partnership, and that none of us can do it on our own. Every time we engage with NGO partners, be it starting on a good foot or starting on a challenging foot, we learn a tremendous amount. And that's the way that we always approach it. And we've always found that no matter what the starting point is, they've informed our business decisions. We have great partnerships. Our work with CDB has been for a very long time, for example. WWF, CARE, TechnoServe, there's many, many others. These folks help us not only understand more insight to the business imperative that we're trying to address, but equally the challenge of executing this on the ground and how we bring it to life. And having them as partners in executing, be it in agricultural work, in the US or in India, for examples, or be it through creation of our energy strategies, hugely helpful and insightful to how we continue to move forward.
Yeah, and I would say that those partnerships are very important to Google for a number of reasons. We're very active on policy issues in every single community in which we're located. Those organizations, those alliances can be very pivotal in helping to sort of push our policy efforts forward. Also, just industry coalitions, being able to network with the peers in our industry and having a common forum for us to be talking about issues can be really critical. Just this week, we announced that we're joining RE100, as well as WRI Buyers Principles. And so we're going to be very active in those organizations. And that's a critical part of our long-term strategy to move markets in the directions that we need to move them.
That's great. No, thank you. And so, if I now look at Ken and Libby, you're sitting in, working from the state, working from the city, you've got ambitious climate action plans, you've got restless NGOs pounding at the door, wanting to work with everyone. You've got targets that you have to meet that are now you're now accountable for meeting those on behalf of the citizens. Talk to us a little bit about some of the interactions and how you work through partnerships to try to achieve the goals that your cities and your cities in the state of California have already set.
I want to talk a little bit about how I work with my business community in Oakland. As you noted, I'm a relatively new mayor. I have not even finished my first year. But so one of the things that I have done is started to put together something that I'm calling a vision council. And these are my top corporate leaders, my largest employers, and kind of a representation of not just leadership in employment, but leadership in corporate citizenship. And as I went to these different CEOs to talk about what I wanted out of this council, and part of it is selling Oakland, right? That's my job as mayor, to promote my city, to make people excited about moving there, growing their businesses there. And also, how do we define our own brand of corporate citizenship? What does it mean to be part of the Oakland community? And part of what it clearly means in Oakland is to have a sustainability mindset, to care about things like climate change, as well as other social equity issues. And I loved hearing the business case for this. So in the Bay Area, it's I might need a change. Speaking of technology, obviously tech is a big part of our economy, and what drives profits is attracting the best talent. And there is fierce competition for talent right now. And what we're increasingly finding is that the best talent, particularly in our millennial workforce, wants to go to a company that is a lot more than just making money. They want to go to a company where there is psychic compensation as well, and where things like caring about climate, being involved in the community, having a corporate responsibility platform is important to the workers. And that's also why we see a lot of companies moving to vibrant, exciting, diverse cities like Oakland, which is great for us. But I think it's really important to make that, again, economic argument about why climate change is something that is good for your bottom line, good for your company, as well as good for your city.
So I'll take a little bit different tack. I would say every single policy that we work on has some aspect in connection to business and NGOs and civil society, and I'll give 3 quick examples. We just completed a process of identifying in a 4-month period the areas of least conflict lands in the San Joaquin Valley where there could be solar development. It's a hugely difficult set of issues because land use is always hard, and siting things over time in places like deserts where there are all kinds of endangered species and sensitive habitats is very time-consuming and very difficult. So we tried to approach it from a different perspective. We brought in businesses and environmental groups. We brought in local governments and military and all kinds of interests. Over 200 parties participated in a 4-month process using technology to find the best locations for siting, and that will drive decisions like how to provide transmission. So that's one example. The next is how do we do development in a sustainable way? California has a high-speed rail system currently under development. Well, how do we ensure that we have development around high-speed rail stations that's connected to transit, that also preserves farmland and open space? Well, it's a joint operation between local government, state government, NGOs, and business. It's the same theme. And then third example is California has the world's only requirement for energy storage as a separate category required for utilities to purchase and provide by 2020 1,350 megawatts. Relatively modest amount, But that policy alone is driving a huge amount of innovation and worldwide interest from multiple corporations to be first to fulfill, at a economic way, energy storage.
So great. I'm mindful of time. I think we have time for a couple of questions from the audience, and then before we finish, I'll turn back to the panelists for one final remark. So do we have any questions or comment? Yes.
Please introduce yourself first.
Thank you. My name is Damandeep. I'm Lance's colleague from India. I work with CDP India. And my question is really to all the California participants is that the Indian Prime Minister just visited and would like, as requested, California to share all this expertise. So to bring the international dimension to this conversation, are you helping other nations and providing this expertise and bring them along on the low carbon pathway? Thank you.
So since I have the mic, I'll take the first shot at that. Governor Brown last month met with Prime Minister Modi. That was a week after he met with President Xi of China. Are just two of the series of meetings. California is extremely involved in working primarily, well, not primarily, but extensively with China on cap and trade markets, on black carbon emissions, on all kinds of technology and issues. We are trying to develop further connection with India. We would actually like to do more with India. We think we're on the road to doing that, and we have a lot of other international cooperative efforts along those lines.
I mean, I think when we think about what's going to happen worldwide, and particularly in places like India that are going to be big users, new users, and growing users of energy, it's going to be driven by technology trends. And even more, I think what California is doing from a policy standpoint and from an investment standpoint, over half the venture capital in energy in the United States goes to California. So when we think about what's going to drive down the costs and make it much cheaper for people around the world to use renewables, to use the new technologies, what we're doing from a private sector standpoint and from an investment standpoint is really going to make it possible, I think, in energy for countries to leapfrog the old technologies and never go through them, just the way it worked in cell phone technology. So that, people used to ask, how are we ever going to build out copper wire around the world so people can have phones? And the answer is, we're not going to. We're going to do something much better than that. And I think that's actually what's going to happen in energy as well. That for the 300 million people who are going to get energy in India, they're going to get a better technology than what was originally put in the United States. And they're going to actually be at the forefront of, of this change. And since this is a commodity, the costs as a result of the technology being done in California are going to be a lot lower and are going to be affordable and are going to be able to drive that kind of growth that I know people in India really want.
And I'm just going to add, I invite you to connect some of your cities with our city. So recently Oakland became part of a coalition with 100 cities in China to share, again, municipal practices. And just one example that came out of that, these Chinese cities had never thought about converting their own fleets. And so Oakland was able to show all the emission savings and money savings that we had by reducing the number of vehicles that as a municipal entity we run, and how much we saved by switching them over to hybrid as well as CNG. I already mentioned the renewable diesel. And again, this is just something that hadn't crossed their minds. And so the exchange of information city to city also is very powerful, and we would be very interested in having a similar relationship with 100 cities in India.
And from a corporate perspective, Google brings its values and its passion for this work around the world, no matter where we are. We talked earlier about the 842 megawatts that we just announced. 80 megawatts of that is in Chile, where we're building a data center. And Chile is a very interesting energy environment. They're not necessarily energy independent, but as a corporation, we're an important part, in my opinion, of helping make it energy independent and help make it sustainable and green at the same time.
I just want to give one shout out for India. The Kellogg Company, almost 100% of its energy for its operations in India are renewable fuels, We've got 2 facilities there now, one that we just opened last year. It's one of our fastest growing markets where we love the market. We've been there for a long time. And both of our facilities there use biofuel and renewable fuels to run, making all that great food. So we love India and continue to invest there.
Well, I know we're on a very tight timeline here. There are many people, other events lined up on the runway, and I feel like we're just getting started. I would love to take some more questions, but I think we're going to have to close out because what I'd like to do is actually, since we're here at COP, as we know, one of the most precious commodities in the world is airtime. And so I'd like to give our panelists one final word. So the negotiations are unfolding. The people who are working on the latest draft of a negotiation are sitting not very far from you right now. And I'd like to give you an opportunity if there was a message you wanted to send to them from your governments, from your state government, from your city government, from your companies, and from your investment firm or your NGO. I'd like you to take a moment just to do that right now. So Ken, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so the message is that the reductions that are needed, the ambition that's needed, are going to come from states, from cities, from regions that are working on the ground, and their contributions need to be recognized, and part of a meaningful agreement will recognize that those are where the future of emission reductions are coming from, along with the private sector.
We would echo the need for ambitious targets and an ambitious result out of this week. But one thing I will add is that the momentum of this cross-sector, collaborative, public-private contribution to the momentum and to the outcomes has been tremendous. And as a voice leader from business, bringing our part and our 2-degree commitments to the table globally, we would like to see the same resulting from the treaty negotiations as well.
I just would add the sense of urgency, that this is not some theoretical science fiction novel, that this is real, it is impacting cities like ours today. I mean, we are furiously building up the levees of our airport so that it doesn't go underneath the bay. Yesterday I was on a panel with a council member from Kotzebue, Alaska, who's lost more than one of her family members who fell through thin ice. And they were never able to even have the dignity of recovering the bodies of her loved ones. So climate change is real, it is upon us. So it is not time to be wimpy. Be bold, grow a pair. Oh, did I say that? And know that you have all these other partners behind you. Take strength from not just our commitment, but our successes that we have already demonstrated.
Yeah, and I would also agree with the sense of urgency and the need for actual material results from this. We've seen a tremendous change over the past few years as corporations really wake up to this issue. More than half of Fortune 100 companies globally have greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets or renewable energy targets. Companies like Google and lots of other folks in our industry and elsewhere are doing big things. They're trying to do their part. It's very important that these two pieces really meet.
So what I would say is that if you come from a place where technology is a given and where people are always working on new technologies, you're completely inured to the idea that costs will keep going down. So when we think about what's going to happen in terms of technologically driven energy, we are highly confident that the costs are going to continue to go down. Solar's gone down 80% in the last 5 years. It's not stopping. So the message that I would take away from this is this. It's not that you're going to have to pay something to be part of progressive energy. Not being part of progressive energy is going to turn out to be an incredibly foolish economic decision. So the idea that making these decisions is going to be a cost, and you have to ask yourself, is the cost worth the benefits? The answer is actually you're going to get paid to be part of this change. These are the economic decisions with technology behind it that is actually going to make everybody, if you're really not part of this, you're not going to be competitive in the world.
Great. So there you have it, negotiators, from Superwoman and all her friends, all her super friends on the stage. You have heard the message. Thank you all for coming. On behalf of the staff and friends of CDP around the world, I want to thank you for supporting our work. And please join me in thanking our panelists with a round of applause, wishing you all a successful COP and all of us a successful COP.